Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Power Rankings, the TMV Power Rankings for kickoff. We did EMEA a couple days ago. Today, we're going to do Americas. Here are all of the Americas teams. Look at them in all their glory. We're going to do what we did in the last video, which is just remind you of what those teams, what they've done, what their current rosters look like, and then talk about how good they're going to be for kickoff. So let's dive in, and our first team is 100T Thieves. Here is their team. Here, they obviously added Vora and Timotimo. They brought back Bang from Sentinels. Their first game is against Leviatan, which should be, I think, a pretty good test overall for both teams. But in terms of where I think 100 Thieves will be, I think for kickoff, I'm somewhat optimistic actually for 100 Thieves. One thing that I like what we've seen so far from them in the offseason is that it seems like they're leaning pretty heavy into cryo, playing chamber on most of the maps in the map pool, and they're just running with that essentially. And I think having your kind of own meta, I don't think most teams will do that. We'll see some chamber, I'm sure, from other teams, but I don't think like most maps teams will play chamber. But I think having your own style of meta that fits your team, that allows cryo to basically just say, you take over a game and win us this game, I think that's actually a pretty decent idea. And then allowing the rest of the team to kind of fill in, I think that's playing to that win condition. So I am somewhat hopeful for this team for 100 Thieves. I'm not going to go crazy and say, yeah, they're going to finish definitely in the top 3, but I think for now I'm going to put them around middle of the pack, and we'll come to see how this works out. Okay, next up is Cloud9. They play Loud in their first game, which is probably a game that I think that they're favored for, but again, should be a decent test for both teams. Obviously, the big change that they made was bringing in Zelsis. They also brought in Penny as well. So for C9, I mean, I'm not going to shock any of you, I don't think here, but I'm also just going to put them in this kind of middle of the pack group, and we'll sort them out later on. Okay, next up is MV, and we know for MV that they had to make a couple changes because 2 of their players were too young. They brought in Kesnet and Rossy, right, which is some interesting players to bring in. I think MV are going to be a very interesting team to watch. Obviously, we'll have to see if their kind of playstyle, which I expect that they will keep up with those players that they brought in. Will that be able to work at the tier 1 level as well as it did in tier 2? I don't know. But I think I'm, for now, again, just going to put them in this middle of the pack and kind of see where they land. Okay, next up is EG, and EG play against Envy in their first game, which again, I think will be a good test for both teams. They bring in DGs in, they bring in Okeanos, they bring in Bao, they bring in Com back, I think that this is actually EG on paper their best team that they've had probably since 2023. But I do still think what tends to happen with EG is that they tend to get better throughout the season. They tend to not start so well in kickoff. So for that reason, I'm going to put EG in kind of the lower group in the tier below this for now. But as time goes on, I do expect EG to eventually end up here. And who knows, maybe end up challenging by the time we get to champs. Okay, for Furia, they play Crew in their first game. And again, this Furia roster is obviously very different to other Furia rosters that we've seen before. They've kind of gone away from the whole Brazilian thing. This is a team that is interesting, but I'm not sure how high the ceiling is. And so for that reason, for Furia, again, I feel like I kind of just have to put them down here in this group, but they'll definitely be better than last year's Furia. Okay, next up is G2, and G2's first game will be against the winner of 100 Thieves and Lev. So that actually should be a pretty good test in their first game, no matter who wins that game. That shouldn't be like a free win. Now, G2, obviously their big change was they brought in Baby Bay for Jonah P, which was a little bit controversial. You can see they didn't do so great in this Radiant International, but they did win Red Bull home ground. Looks pretty good, and beating NRG 3-0 in the final also looks pretty good. So I still think obviously G2 are going to be one of the best teams in Americas. And so for that reason, they're obviously going to go up here towards the top. Okay, moving on to Crew, whose first game is against Furia, which is a very winnable game. And I know other people have looked at this Crew roster and been like, I'm not really seeing it for Crew. I'm actually pretty high on this roster of Crew. I think this could be a pretty good team. I know that Sadek and Les obviously didn't have the best of times in EMEA, but like, especially with Les, we need to remember, like, when Les is on, and he even did show it at times on Vitality last year as well, like, he's one of the best players in the world when he's feeling it. If they get that version of Les, there's no way this Crew team is that bad. There's just no way. And with Sadek as well, you have to remember, before Sadek went to KC, was in the same conversations as Boaster and FNS, or Valen or Munchkin or whoever you want to put in there as like the GOAT IGLs. In fact, if you were making a GOAT IGL list of all-time Valorant, Sadek would be in that conversation. And again, yeah, it didn't work on KC, but I think if he can, find a system that works for him and his team here back in Americas, would it shock you if crew were good if they had, you know, Peak Les and Peak Sadak back together? And so I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to say that crew are definitely going to make it to the first Masters, though it is in Santiago, and that would be cool for them if they did make it. But I am certainly going to put them in this pack, and I'll tell you right now, they're going to be ahead of some of these other teams. Okay, moving on to Lev, who again, first game against 100 Thieves. And for Lev, I am pretty high on this roster, right? I think this will be a very good team, like a lot of people. There seems to be quite a lot of hype for this Lev roster in general. The thing that's going to bring them down early on here is the fact that Neon isn't old enough to play during kickoff, so they're going to have to play with a sub in PXS, which is going to bring them down. Again, I am a believer in this Lev roster, but because they're going to have to play with a sub here in kickoff, I have to put them in this group. Okay, moving on to Loud, and when it comes to Loud, I looked at this roster and I was like, you know, they actually could do quite a bit of damage. My concerns, though, are kind of the IGLing with Pancada and whether that will work or not, and the fact that we saw most of this team last year, you know, it was mostly the same team other than Darker. We saw them and they just couldn't close out games. I am still haunted somewhat by looking at all of this, right? Look at all these results here. You know, how can I look at this when it's mostly the same team and not think, will they be that good? And so for that reason, I do think I have to put Loud kind of in this group with EG and Furia. Okay, next up is MiBR, and MiBR's first game will be against one of Envy or EG, which I think is a fairly favorable matchup. I think MiBR, if they get Envy, will match up to their playstyle pretty well, because obviously Envy, when you look at their team, they should have the kind of the shooters to shoot back at Envy, to be honest. So obviously I'm pretty high on MiBR stocks kind of longer term, but obviously we know that they haven't been practicing because of Aspas's health conditions. So yeah, right now for kickoff, maybe they won't be at peak form. And so for that reason, of course, I am still going to put them up here because I expect them to be good. But I think I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if they didn't make Master Santiago because of the fact that they haven't been practicing that much. Okay, NRG. NRG obviously won champs. If NRG in their first game, they will play Loud or Cloud9, I would definitely favor them against either of those opponents. So they should be doing pretty good. They brought in Kiko for the retiring Som, so that should be a good move. And, you know, they just won champs, so it's going to be hard not to kind of trust this team, at least somewhat. And so obviously NRG, they're going to go in this top group, and we'll see who ends up number one. And then finally, Sen City, let's talk about Sentinels. So Sen's first game is against Crew or Furia. Now, as I've kind of said, I'm pretty high on Crew, so if Sen did play Crew, wouldn't shock me if Crew won that, to be honest. In terms of their team, I am still fairly high on this Sen team. I think probably like the ceiling of like winning trophies, you know, of like what the expectation for the last year's team was, maybe isn't there. But I still don't think this team will be bad. And so for that reason, I think I'm going to put them in this group rather than the top group. And I think that's really the difference from last year to this year. Is last year we were probably looking at putting them in this top group, whereas this year, you know, they are going to have to be down here in kind of this middle of the pack. And so sorting it, let's go from bottom to top here. I think I would have, I think actually this is the order I would put it in terms of likelihood to, you know, make a big splash. I think Loud are the most likely of these three teams, but I do think in the future, EG will be moving up these lists for me probably pretty quickly, I think. And I do think that the gap is not that big, right? Last year we had some real stinkers in Americas. This year I don't. Like, the gap between these teams and these teams will not be that big. Sorting out this middle of the pack group is quite interesting, though. Who do I want to put in ninth? I mean, that is pretty tough, and this is why Americas does get tough, because I think you could make a case for... Honestly, you could make a decent case for quite a few of these teams being in ninth. Think I'm gonna actually... I'm a bit of an Envy doubter in terms of the tier 1 stuff, in terms of where they are. Again, don't see this as like, you know, there is... I would not be... If Envy beats Sentinels, I would not be shocked, right? If Envy beat any of these teams, I would not be shocked. I am gonna put them in ninth, though, just because I do have some doubts. I do still want to see, like, their overall playstyle kind of, you know, translate properly to tier 1, and also with the new players, how does that work out? So I think I have more questions about Envy than these other teams. Then I think I am going to go Cloud9 in 8. To be honest, maybe I'm underrating Cloud9 there a bit, because they'll probably end up in 7th or 6th knowing Cloud9. I think I'm actually going to go to Lev 7th. If Lev were playing with their full team with Neon, they would probably be higher. They'd probably be pushing, you know, towards 4th or 5th. Then I'm going to put 100 Thieves in 6th, I think. And I mean, I told you I'm high on Crew. I'm not going to go too crazy. I'm going to put Sen above Crew, because I think it is more likely that Sen will just be more solid and be good than it is for Crew. But I am kind of high on Crew, as you can tell. And then moving to the very top of the list, I think I have to put MiBR third. I think that's pretty easy, to be honest, just because of that lack of practice time. I feel very good about G2 and NRG kind of making it to Santiago. I think that's very likely. And then G2 or NRG, who's number one? Overall, I think I have more faith that NRG will be good. Probably a higher ceiling, I guess, maybe NRG overall as well. So I'll put them number one. Stay tuned for tomorrow where I'll be doing EMEA and I'll do a quick China power ranking for you as well. And yeah, this will definitely go right. Surely, nothing could go wrong.